Gavaratariya. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. 31. Gavaratariya. He was reborn in this Buddha age at Savathi, in a Brahmin's family, and named Aggidatta. When grown up he saw the Exalted One work the twin miracle, and, being convinced, he entered the monk's order. Taking a subject for meditation, he went to the Ratira forest, and became known as Gavaratariya. Growing in insight, he in a short time attained arahantship. Upon that he went to worship the Exalted One at Savathi. His family, hearing of his coming, bestowed liberal gifts upon him. And when he wished to go back to the forest, they said, "Sir, the forest is full of peril through the gadflies and mosquitoes. Stay here." But the Thera, devoted to detachment, replied, "Life in the forest suits me," and confessing Anya he uttered this verse. In the great forest, in the mighty woods, touched though I be by gadfly and by gnat, I yet would roam, like warrior elephant, in midst of battle, mindful, vigilant. Thera 1. Supia. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. 32. Supia. He in this Buddha age was reborn, in consequence of his actions, in a despised class, as one of a clan of watchmen in a cemetery at Savathi. Converted by the preaching of the Thera Sapaka his friend, he entered the monk's order and attained to the highest, declaring this in his saying while he yet was striving for arahantship. O would that I who hourly waste, might change for that which never decays, who ever burn, might change for that peaceful bliss even for the peace that pass all, safety beyond compare. Thera 1. Sapaka. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. 33. Sapaka. He was reborn in this Buddha age at Savathi, of a very poor woman. In her travail his mother fell into a long deep swoon, so that her family relatives said, "She is dead." And they took her to the cemetery, and prepared to cremate the body. But a spirit prevented the fire burning by a storm of wind and rain, so they went away. Then was the child born hale while the mother died. And the spirit, in human shape, took the infant and placed it in the watchman's house, nourishing it for a time with suitable food. After that the watchman adopted it, and the child grew up with his own son Supia. And because of his birth in the cemetery, he became known as Sapaka, the waif. When he was 7 years old it came to pass that the Exalted One early in the morning spread out his divine net of insight and meditation what folk might be brought in. And seeing what the net enclosed, he went to the cemetery. The boy, impelled by his antecedents, approached the Lord with a gladdened mind and saluted him. The Lord taught him, so that he asked to leave the world, and when asked to gain his father's consent, fetched the latter to the Lord. The father saluted, and asked the Lord to admit the boy. And the Lord had him admitted, and assigned to him the study of fraternal love. He, taking this exercise and living in the cemetery, soon acquired the corresponding jhana. And making that his base, he fostered insight and realized arahantship. As arahant he showed in his verse to the other bhikkhus living there the principle of the love exercises, asking them make no difference between those who were to them friendly, indifferent, or hostile. For all alike their love should be one and the same in its nature, and should include all realms, all beings, at all ages. Even as she would be very good towards her only child, her well-beloved son, so too you should be very good towards all creatures everywhere and everyone. Thera 1. Pasya. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. 34. Pasya. He was reborn in this Buddha age at Savathi, as the son of a very wealthy counselor, and the younger brother of the Thera Sangamaji. When he was grown up he married. But when a son was born to him, he, being impelled by the order of things belonging to the last span of life, grew anxious concerning birth and the like. So he left the world and lived alone in the forest, exercising himself in the four truths. And soon after he won arahantship. Then he went to Savathi to worship the Exalted One, and came to his home. There his former wife entertained him and, unaware of his disposition, was desirous of drawing him back by her attractions. The Thera, thinking, alas! The fool of desire has designs even on such as me, said no word, but rose up and went away into the forest. And the bhikkhus there said to him, Why, friend, you are come back too quickly. Have you not seen your people? The Thera told them what had taken place, and recited a verse. Best when not near, both now and forever, are such as these for him who understands. Forth from the township to the woods I went. From there to my home once more I came. But from there, rising I got up again, nor ever did this same Pasya let fall a word. Thera 1. Samanakani. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. 35. Samanyakani. He was reborn in this Buddha age as the son of a wanderer, and converted to the religious life when he saw the Exalted One perform the twin miracle. And through jhana he attained arahantship. Now a wanderer named Katyana, whom he had known as a layman, had lost all support from the lay people since the Buddha had arisen, and was destitute. He came to the Thera and said, You of the Sakyans, who have won much fame and support, live happily, but we are distressed and destitute. What should one do to compass happiness both in this life and the next? The Thera said, Happiness not of the world. This, for one who undergoes the suitable procedure to get it, and who gets it, is alone to be called unqualified happiness. And to illustrate this by his own attainment, he uttered this verse. Happiness he who seeks may win, and he practice the seeking. Honor he gains beside, and growth of renown shall befall him. So he but practice the road called straight, even the Aryan. The noble eightfold path by which we may reach salvation. Single quote. Thera 1. Kuma's son. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. 36. Kuma's son. Reborn in this Buddha age in the Avanti country, at the town of Velakanda in the family of a housefather, he was called Nanda. But his mother's name was Kuma, from where he was known as Kuma's son. He entered the monk's order after hearing the venerable Sariputta preach, and studied on the slope of the frontier hills. But it was only after he had gone to hear the Exalted One that he was able so to correct his exercises, as to realize arahantship. As arahant he saw that the other bhikkhus showed excess in bodily needs, and he addressed them in the doctrine, saying, O goodly are the things our ears now hear. O goodly is the life we here may lead. O good it is always to lack a house. Now questioning on things of high import. Now showing all due thanks and reverence. Such is the calling of the true monk. Of him who owns not of anything. Thera 1. Friend of Kuma's son. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. 37. Friend of Kuma's son. Reborn in this Buddha age at the town of Velakanda, of a wealthy family, and named Sudanta, some say Vasuloki, he became the dear friend of Kuma's son. When the latter left the world, he thought, that can be no mean religion which Kuma's son has entered. So he went and heard the Lord preach. Upon that he was filled with a much more fervent desire and entered the monk's order, living with Kuma's son on the frontier hills devoted to religious exercises. Now at that time many bhikkhus touring in various districts, going and coming, halted at that station, so that there was much noise. And Sudanta, disturbed in his concentration of mind, made his trouble the goad for the taming of his thoughts, and uttered this verse. To many regions back and forth they move about, heedless of heart upon their rounds, and balk the mind's due concentration. What, indeed, shall all this vagabondage bring to pass? Hence is it meet that clamor be subdued, nor harass him who gladly would meditate. Thera 1. Gavampati. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. 38. Gavampati. He was reborn in this Buddha age as one of the 4 lay companions of the Thera Yasa, who, when they heard of Yasa's renunciation, imitated him, and also won arahantship. Thereafter he lived in the Anyana grove at Saketa, experiencing the bliss of emancipation. Now at that time the Exalted One came also with a great company of bhikkhus to the Anyana grove. And the accommodation was insufficient, many of the bhikkhus sleeping around the vihara on the sandbanks of the river Sarabu. Then in the middle of the night the stream rose in flood, and a great cry arose from the younger monks. The Exalted One hearing it, sent for the venerable Gavampati, and said, "Go, Gavampati, arrest the rising stream, and put the bhikkhus at ease." And the Thera by his mystic power did so, and stopped the stream afar so that it stood up like a mountain peak. From then on the might of the Thera became known. One day as the Lord sat teaching in the midst of a great assembly he saw Gavampati, and in compassion for the world praised his virtues in this verse. Who by his might reared up the Sarabu, who stands self-reliant and unmoved. Who has transcended every tie, Gavampati. Him mighty seer the very gods praise. Surpasser of the coming back to be. Thera 1. Tissa. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. 39. Tissa. He was born in this Buddha age at Kapilavatthu, as the son of the Buddha's aunt, and named Tissa. He left the world to follow the Exalted One. And living in a woodland settlement, was proud because of his rank, being irritable and critical in his conduct, so that he did not do his duties with zeal. Then the Lord, surveying him one day with celestial vision from afar, while he was sleeping with open mouth in afternoon, came over him above as a glorious divine image shedding grace upon him, and wakening him with these words. As one is down hit by impending sword. As one whose hair and turban are aflame, so let the monk, mindful and alert, go forth, all worldly passions left behind. When the Thera heard this, his heart was filled with anguish, and he abode intent on insight. Noting this, the Lord taught him the Sutta of Thera Tissa, which is in the Sayutta collection. At the close of it Tissa was established in arahantship. And to confess Anya and honor the Lord, he uttered that same verse. Thera 1. Vadamana. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. 40. Vadamana. Reborn in this Buddha age at Vesali, in the family of a Lichavi Raja, he became as a pious boy a servant to the monk's order. Later, after he had been initiated into monkhood, he also was subject to sloth and torpor, and was also aroused by the Lord with this verse. As one threatened by impending sword. As one whose hair and turban are aflame. So let the monk, mindful and alert, go forth, all lust of living left behind. Thera 1. Siriwata. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. 41. Siriwata. He was reborn in this Buddha age at Rājagaha, in the house of a prosperous Brahmin. Previous causes induced him. When King Bimbisara met the Lord, to take to monk's order, and he went to a certain forest near the hills Vibhara and Pandava, and there lived devoted to religious exercises. And there arose once a great storm, and the lightnings entered the cave. But the wind from the pregnant clouds assuaged the heat and fever oppressing the Thera. So that by the more suitable temperature his heart grew concentrated, and he was able to exercise such insight that he won arahantship. So he, with Anya as a pretext, broke forth into this utterance touching himself. The lightnings flash even in the rocky cave, striking Vibhara's crest and Pandava, and, in the mountain bosom hid, a child of that incomparable Lord sits. ardent in meditative ecstasy. Thera 1. Kadira Vinaya. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. 42. Kadira Vinaya. He was reborn, in this Buddha age, in the kingdom of Magadha, at the village of Nalaka, as the son of Rupasari, the Brahmani. When he was grown up his mother desired he should marry, but he heard of Sariputta's renunciation, and said, "If my elder brother Upatissa has laid aside this wealth, I too will vomit back his vomit," and he went to the bhikkhus and, announcing himself as the younger brother of the general of the path, he asked for initiation into monkhood. When he had won arahantship in the acacia wood, he went to Savatthi to salute the Exalted One and his brother, staying a few days at the Yeta grove. Then the Lord, seated in the conclave of the Aryans, assigned Ravada the acacia woodlander the first place among forest bhikkhus. At another time he went to his native village and fetched away his 3 nephews, the sons of his 3 sitters, Kala, Upakala, and Sisupakala. Named respectively, Kala, Upakala, and Sisupakala. And initiated them into monkhood. One day the Thera was ill, and Sariputta heard of it, and said, "I will make inquiry after Ravada's state and treatment." And seeing him coming far off, Ravada addressed the 3 novices to be heedful, saying, "Come, Kala, and you, Upakala too, Sisupakala also, take good heed. Be on your guard, for he who comes to you is as a wondrous archer splitting hairs." And when they heard him the novices went forth to meet the general of the path, and while he conversed with their uncle, sat near composed and intent. When he approached them, they rose up, bowed, and remained standing. The Thera asked them at which vihara they were each living, and they replied, "At such an one." Then, instructing the boys, he said, "My younger brother has indeed taught the lesser duties belonging to the path," and thus praising Ravada, he departed. Thera 1. Sumangala. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. 43. Sumangala. He was reborn in this Buddha age at a small village near Savatthi, in a poor family. Grown up, he earned hiye living in the fields, furnished with a little sickle, plough, and spade. Now one day when King Pasenudi of Kosala was bestowing a great offering on the Exalted One and the monk's order, he went, taking milk and butter, along with men who were taking woodwork. Seeing the attentions and honors paid to the monks and sisters, he thought, "These Sakyan monks live in sheltered lodgings and in delicate robes. What if I too were now to leave the world?" And he approached a certain great Thera and made known his intention. The Thera out of compassion admitted him, and sent him into the forest with an exercise. But in solitude he pined and wavered, and departed to his native village. Then as he went along he saw the peasants plowing the fields in soiled garments, covered with dust blown by hot winds. And he thought, "Truly these fellows earn their living in great misery." And feeling anxious, his insight approaching maturity, he set himself to do the exercises that had been given him, going to the roots of a tree, and remaining in seclusion. Thus he finally won arahantship. Thereafter, to celebrate his own emancipation from the sorrows of life, he broke forth into this saying, well rid, oh excellently rid, am I from these 3 crooked tasks and tools. Rid of my reaping with your sickles, rid of working with plows, and rid my back of bending over these wretched little spades. Though they be ever here, yes, ever here. Enough of them, I say, for me, enough. Go meditate, Sumangala, yes, go. And meditate, Sumangala, and remain earnest and diligent, Sumangala. This curious and racy verse runs into 4 lines of text. Is of no assignable meter or symmetry, and would seem to represent a Walt Whitman-esque effort of a peasant bhikkhu to turn out rough-hewn the utterance of his emotions. As such, it is of striking interest. and is paralleled in homeliness and verve by the verse of Mutta, herself of humble circumstances, rejoicing to be rid of her special trio of crooked things husband, quern, and churn. Thera 1. Sanu. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. 44. Sanu. He was reborn in this Buddha age at Savatthi, in the family of a lay follower, after the father had left his home. The mother, naming him Sanu, brought him when he was 7 years old to the bhikkhus for initiation into monkhood, deeming she would thus ensure for him supreme happiness. Now Sanu, the novice, became very learned, a teacher of doctrine, and practiced in the jhana of bliss, being beloved by gods and men. And as we know from the Sanu, Sutta his mother, in his previous birth, was a Yaka. Now as time went on, Sanu lost his intellectual discernment and grew dissatisfied, and longed to go a-roaming. Then his previous mother perceived this, and warned his human mother saying, "Your son has a fancy to roam," for that reason made him mobilize himself. Tell him what the Yakas say. Do not do of evil, open or concealed. If you do evil now or will do later, you will not escape from sorrow, even though you flee. Thus saying, the Yaka mother disappeared. But when the human mother heard, she was overwhelmed with grief. Then Sanu the novice, taking his robe and bowl, set out early and came to his mother. At sight of her sorrow he said, "Mother, why do you weep?" When she told him why, he said this verse, "Mother, they weep for the dead, or the living they may not see. But for him, O mother, who lives, who is here, why mourn you for me?" His mother answered him from the suttas, "This is death, O bhikkhus, that one should reject the training and turn again to lower things," and with this verse, "They mourn for son who lies dead, or him who is alive but whom they no more see. And him they mourn, who though he did renounce the world, my son, did here come again. For though he live again, yet is he dead. Drawn forth from burning embers, O my dear. Do you on embers wish to fall again?" When he heard her, anguish seized on Sanu the novice, and making firm his insight, he soon won arahantship. And upon that thinking, my victory is due to that verse, he repeated it as his saying. Thera 1. Ramani Yavaharan. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. 45. Ramani Yavaharan. Reborn in this Buddha age at Rājagaha, as the son of a leading citizen, he lived in youthful wantonness. One day he saw the king's officers arresting an adulterer, and growing agitated, he listened to the Lord teaching, and left the world. As a bhikkhu, but still susceptible to fleshly lusts, he made himself a well-decorated chamber, well furnished as to food and drink, seat and couch. And so he ever lived. For this reason he was known as Ramaniya Viharan. But his previous indulgence making the monk's life too hard for him, he felt unworthy to accept the offerings of the faithful and said, "I will roam." On his way he sat down beneath a tree. And as carts were passing by on the road, one ox being weary stumbled at a rough place and fell. The carter loosened its yoke, gave it hay and water and so allayed its fatigue. Then he harnessed it again and they went on. And the Thera thought, "Even as this ox having stumbled has arisen and draws his own load, so is it my duty, who once have stumbled in the forest of vice, to arise and carry out the duty of a monk." And thoughtfully turning back, he told what he had done and seen to Theraupali, was by him absolved from his fault, and helped back into right ways. And not long after he attained arahantship. Thereafter enjoying the bliss of freedom, he set forth his lapse and return in this verse. Even though he trip and fall, the mettled brute of noble breed will firm stand once more. So look on me as one who having learned of him, the all-enlightened one, have gained true insight, am become of noble breed, and of the very Buddha very child. Thera 1. Samadhi. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. 46. Samadhi. He was reborn in this Buddha age at Rājagaha, in a clansman's family. From the time he was born the wealth of his family increased, and he himself, handsome and virtuous, became known as Samadhi. He saw the power of the Buddha when the latter was met by Bimbisara, won faith in him, and left the world, remaining devoted to meditation. When the Exalted One was staying at the Tapada Park, Samadhi one day was meditating in exquisite joy on his good fortune as a bhikkhu. Then Mara the Evil One, unable to bear it, made a fearful noise near him, as if the very earth were splitting. The Thera told this to the Exalted One. The latter asked him to persist where he was and think no more about it. He obeyed, and soon after won arahantship. Mara, unaware of it, once more created a fearful noise. But the Thera felt no fear. Undaunted by all such Maras, not once have I turned a hair. And confessing Anya, he uttered this verse. In trust and hope forth from my home I came. Into the homeless life. And there in me have mindfulness and insight grown, and tense. And well composed my heart and mind. Make you. Whatever shams you list, you will harm me not. And Mara, thus rebuked, said, the monk knows me, and vanished from that place. Thera 1. Ujjaya. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. 47. Ujjaya. He was reborn in this Buddha age at Rājagaha, as the son of a Brahmin graduate. Grown up and proficient in the three Vedas. He saw no kernel in them, and being urged by maturity of conditions, he went to the bamboo grove, and when he had heard the Lord preach, he left the world. Meditating in the forest on ethical conduct, he was not long in winning arahantship. Upon that he approached the Lord, saluted him, seated himself on one side and, by praising the Exalted One, declared Anna in this verse. Buddha the Awakened One, the Great One hail. All hail. You who from every bond are wholly free. Strong in the wisdom I learned of you, I live from fourfold venom cleansed, sane, immune. Thera 1. Sanjaya. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. 48. Sanjaya. He was reborn in this Buddha age, at Rājagaha, as the son of a wealthy Brahmin. Grown up, he followed the example of Brahmayu, Pakarasati and other well-known Brahmins, who found faith in the Lord and reached the first path. Later he entered the monk's order and acquired the 6 abhinyas. Then, declaring Anna, he uttered this verse. Since I went forth from home to homeless life, never have I harbored conscious wish or plan, unaryan, or linked with enmity. Thera 1. Ramanayaka. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. 49. Ramanayaka. Reborn in this Buddha age at Savathi in a wealthy family, his heart was moved when the Yeta grove was presented, and he left the world. Living in the forest he meditated on ethical conduct, and, because of his attainments and charm, he became called Ramanayaka. Now one day Mara the Evil One, wishing to disturb him, made a fearful noise. The Thera, hearing it, was with his habitual courage unafraid, and knew it was Mara. And to show his contempt he uttered this verse. Not all the clitter-clatter of your noise, no more than chirp and squeal of forest sounds, avail to make pulse throb or mind distraught. For one the aim to which my heart is given. This verse became the Thera's declaration of Anya. Thera 1. Vimala. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. 50. Vimala. He was reborn in this Buddha age at Rājagaha, of a wealthy family, and because a wish he had uttered over a pious act when Kaseapa was Buddha. His body was as pure as a dewdrop on a lotus-leaf, or as that of the Bodhisat in his last birth. For that reason he was named Vimala. When grown-up Ho was filled with faith on seeing the Buddha at Rājagaha, and leaving the world, took a form of study and went to live in a mountain cave in Kosala. Now one day a vast storm cloud spread over the firmament and the rain fell, allaying heat and feverishness, so tuat the Thera was able to concentrate till he had won arahantship. Upon that, rejoicing over his accomplished task, he broke forth in this saying: The burdened earth is sprinkled by the rain. The winds blow cold, the lightnings roam on high. Eased and allayed the obsessions of the mind, and in my heart the spirit's mastery. Adapted from the archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys.